Sir, now I want to talk to you about Kerala's economic crisis. We made a video about a month back,
Yep.
and during that time, we saw some stats, and they were just very disturbing. 3.5 lakh government employees' salaries were delayed. The social security schemes of 55 lakh people was put on hold, and the state was asking the center for money. The most literate state in the country, God's own country, facing an economic disaster. How did that happen? Because and I saw it coming, strangely, because in 2021, RBI actually put out a research paper where they mentioned that there are certain states in the country that are heading the Sri Lanka way. And there, one of those states was Kerala. So, A, how did Kerala end up in an economic disaster? B, what are the lessons that other states have to learn from Kerala?
Well, I have to say, this is where politics comes into the answer, that the communists have done Kerala a huge disservice because in fighting for workers' rights, which is something admirable, they have won those rights, but they've also driven away investors. And the result is that now you start anything from a tourist resort to a factory, and you dread the red flag showing up and the people you've hired being unionized and put on strike, irrespective of how well you're treating them. And many, many people tend to back away because of that. I remember when I left the United Nations and before I came into politics, I was still based in New York, but I was taking an active interest in Kerala. And I remember hosting a dinner for about 40 investors in New York, mainly expatriate Indians with a particular interest in India, but also some Americans, for the then communist industry minister, Elamaram Karim, and his senior bureaucrats to come and do a presentation why they should invest in Kerala. And I thought, I'm doing a favor to my own state. The presentation was done. There was a discussion. At the end of it all, the minister and his top aides went away, and the 40 investors had a good dinner, went away. Not one pledge was made, and later I called up some of these people, including ones I knew personally rather well, and said, aren't you investing? And they all said no. And I said, why not? And they said, we just don't trust the environment in Kerala. And I said, look, you get a literate workforce. People are relatively unemployed. They'll be grateful to have a job. They'll be smart. They're educated. They'll acquire skills very quickly. He said, yeah, but we can get them all. If we just establish the same factory across the border in Tamil Nadu, they'll come in, but the commies won't be there, the unions won't be there, the red flags won't be there. That was the kind of feedback, and that became a very dismaying factor. To my mind, the communists, when they're in power, they don't behave like that anymore. And therefore, they should, at least while in power, they should have been able to attract more investment. They've not succeeded. And that is something that worries me more and more as a Keralite, because when people find that investors aren't coming, they know that they have no choice but to look for jobs elsewhere. I've done an awful lot of convocations in Kerala across the state and various kinds of disciplines. And I sometimes ask students, so what are your plans? And many of them are trying to get the heck out of the state. And when I ask them why, they say, what's there for us in Kerala? Isn't Kerala now an old age home, one young man said. And that's something that struck me. Great quality of life, great place to retire, not a place to work. And that's not a good reputation to have, because you have to survive and you have to grow. And indeed, these old people need people generating incomes and paying taxes if they're going to be surviving. The other thing we need to think about very seriously is the regulatory environment. I mentioned that. The third thing we've got to think about is actually creating an environment in which business is looked upon as welcome rather than as in the old-fashioned thinking in other parts of India, which the rest of India has outgrown, but Kerala hasn't. This thinking that, he's coming in for his private profit and therefore we have to be suspicious of him and make life difficult for him. I've often pointed out in my speeches in Kerala that whereas many, many states sadly have witnessed the phenomenon of farmer suicides, the only state in India that has witnessed investor suicides is Kerala, where people, collect their life savings, come back home to Kerala to set up a business or an industry, and they find so many bureaucratic impediments and obstacles that their sunk investment cannot be recouped, they cannot function, they cannot operate the factory or whatever it is they built, and they end up in despair, having lost everything, committing suicide. There have been 2 such cases in the last 5 years, and it's shocking. It shouldn't be happening. So one of the things I wanted to do, for example, was to bring in an Investor Protection Act. It's not widespread. We don't have one anywhere else in India, but we should have one. Some countries have these, and they guarantee certain rights to investors. Obviously, once you start a business, the risk of success and failure is yours. But you shouldn't have to endure failure because you're not simply allowed to function at all by either bureaucratic or political obstacles placed in your path. And finally, I want to end Kerala's reputation as the one state in the country which still resorts to hartals at the drop of a hat. I want to make them illegal. I want to outlaw them in the state. Everyone has the right to protest in a democracy, but they should protest in a way that does not involve coercing others. There's a famous story, some people claim it's apocryphal, some people swear it's true, of how BMW had negotiated with the Uman Chandi first government back in 2006 to open a factory in Kerala to manufacture automobiles and automobile parts that would have generated 10,000 jobs. Everything was done. The executives came from Germany to sign the agreement, and the day they came, the commies had called a hartal on some political issue. And when they stepped out of the hotel, there were students throwing stones at cars. There were shopkeepers trying to open their shops and the shutters being forcibly downed. State buses being stopped and the air let out of their tires so they couldn't proceed. And these executives are so horrified, they promptly turned tail and fled. And the next month they went to Tamil Nadu, and the same factory was opened in Tamil Nadu, and the 10,000 jobs went there. Now, some people claim the story is not true, but I've heard it from too many sources, and it's too believable because Kerala has hartals all the time at the drop of a hat, and they're conducted with no regard for other people's well-being. There are old people on their way to hospital who have been prevented from going. There are students on their way to exams have been prevented from going. People on their daily commute who've not been allowed to board buses. And it's truly sickening, these things happening. I think it should be outlawed. And what is more, I believe it can be. I think there is more and more recognition. Why is it there are so few hartals when the communists are in power? Why should they have the freedom to resort to it every time they're in opposition, disrupting other people's rights? They have every right to protest, I repeat that, but they have no right to coerce others who want to go about their business and lead their lives. And I think we can pass such a law in the event of a non-communist government coming into power in Kerala. We need to make it possible for Keralites to live and work in their own state. And outlawing hartals will go a long way to ensuring that investors have confidence, along with a slashing of over-regulation, passing of an Investor Protection Act, and updating of many of our old-fashioned laws. I mean, there's still IT laws that and other laws that prohibit women from working off certain hours in the dark and things like that. All of that has to be revamped. We need a much more modern outlook to Kerala business and economy. And I think we can do that, and we can attract more people. Because what Kerala has to offer is fantastic. It's a great environment, a great people, educated, smart, capable, and at the same time, a very pleasant and efficient place to work. And very conscientious, law-abiding citizens for the most part, except the excessively politicized ones. I think we can get this place working again much, much better.
Hi guys, thank you so much for watching the Indian Business Podcast. If you find value in our work, please hit that subscribe button, because for you it might be a zero effort task, but for us that subscriber count is an important instrument to get great guests to our podcast and to make this podcast better for you. So if you find value, please subscribe.